Thank you all for being here. My name is Brittany Hernandez. I am your host for this Lightning Talk series in partnership with Documate. I'm a lawyer and the founder of Cor Meum Law and Cor Meum LLC, both of which focus on how innovations in tech can be used to solve human problems, both within the law and beyond. I'm also a pro Documator, an advisor, a tutor, and the co-creator of the brand new Documator certification course. And I have the privilege of representing Documate around the world as their global ambassador to law schools. Today, I'll be interviewing UK lawyer and transfer pricing expert Paul Sutton, who will share his thoughts on getting started in document automation, an iterative value-focused approach which can get you tangible results in 14 days. Feel free to post your questions in the chat as you think of them, and Paul will pick them up once he concludes. After questions, I'll do a quick wrap up, after which you're free to stay on the call for an optional 5 minutes of speed networking, where I'll invite 4 people to introduce themselves for 1 minute each. I'd now like to introduce today's speaker. Paul is a corporate lawyer based out of the UK, along with me here in London. He is the leading expert on legal structures for multinational groups and the author of Intercompany Agreements for Transfer Pricing Compliance, a Practical Guide. He is also the co-founder of LCN Legal, which is a boutique ultra niche law firm which specializes in the legal implementation of transfer pricing compliance, which we'll go over during our interview, supporting multinational groups and transfer pricing advisors globally. Today, he's going to go over how his team uses Documate to create a suite of different document automation tools with no prior coding experience. He'll also share his philosophy of how to take a pragmatic and iterative approach to automating documents and tasks so as to deliver maximum value as quickly as possible. This includes both internal tools and customer-facing applications. As an example of this approach, he's going to talk a little bit about LCN Legal's upcoming free tool, which will help transfer pricing and tax advisors to health check their intercompany agreements, which are essential for multinational groups to comply with tax and transfer pricing compliance obligations. So this conversation will be particularly useful for lawyers and tax advisors in professional firms and in corporates who want to leverage their know-how using document automation, but are reluctant to commit to large budgets to speculative projects, which is completely understandable, but we'll go over that in detail. It'll also be helpful for lawyers and documenters who want to give their clients more strategic value. So thank you so much for being with us today, Paul. Let's dig into it. So it's going to be, oh, sorry. Let's get out of here and I'll stop sharing my screen. So let's go ahead and dig into it. And I think would be a good place to start just by having a little bit of context. And this format is going to be a little different than we normally do, where I'm going to be having a little chat with Paul. So Paul, do you want to say a little hello and then start with what exactly is transfer pricing and why should companies care about it?
Great, thanks, Brittany, and thank you very much for having me on this conversation. Really appreciate it. So, what is transfer pricing? It's essentially a set of international tax rules which determines, in effect, where or which country gets to tax the profits of multinational groups. So, if you think about a corporation like Starbucks, and let's say Starbucks is making like 5 billion of profits every year in its global operations, the question is, well, which country gets to tax those profits? How much is taxed in the US? How much in the UK, France, Germany, Singapore, China, whatever? And so transfer pricing is about the level of intercompany charges that are paid. So if you think about Starbucks holds IP in the US, but that IP is being used maybe in the UK, so it's natural for the UK entity to pay a royalty on that. The question is, what should that royalty be? What percentage, and how is that substantiated? So that's really what transfer pricing is. Why should corporates care? Well, basically, it's arguably the #1 tax risk for multinational groups right now. It's incredibly complicated. It's a fast-moving area, and the penalties for getting it wrong are significant. So that's the 2-minute introduction to transfer pricing.
I really appreciate that because I think for a lot of the people here, we're all coming from different backgrounds. So we all have different types of specializations. And in my background, it's more entertainment law and intellectual property. But so this is a completely foreign concept to me, but I think it's helpful just for all of us to kind of conceptualize where and contextualize what we're talking about And then just could you go a little bit deeper into why you chose this particular niche area, as this is what LCN Legal focuses on and digs really deep into, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is as a corporate lawyer, doing corporate M&A transactions. That's what I was doing for the first 9 years or so of my legal career. I then joined KPMG's law firm in the UK. That was back in 2001. And I started working with the international tax teams there, the transfer pricing teams there, and dealing with the legal implementation of the tax compliance strategies. And what I noticed is that there was a real disconnect between the tax world and the legal world. In other words, people were using concepts, but really not understanding what each other was saying. And I thought it was a really interesting area to try and bridge that gap. And also from a very selfish perspective, I saw the opportunity to really claim a niche. This could be an area where maybe me personally, maybe our team collectively can be the world leaders in, and at least having that aspiration. We thought, well, let's really own this space, in combination with it being a high value problem to solve. When corporates get it wrong, it could be billions payable in terms of additional unbudgeted for taxes. So really that was the genesis for focusing in this area.
I love that, because I like this idea, like you said, about being the world-class expert, and which is really what you have done in this particular niche area. And I think that's something that we all can learn from you, is really honing in on something that you're very, very good at and that you also like, and kind of really digging into that, not only from the kind of advisory standpoint, but also from the automation standpoint, and building applications that help people with that very, very specific problem, because then you, like you said, you can position yourself in the market like no one else can.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
I'd
go
like to
ahead.
just emphasize, when I started out on this, I knew nothing about this area. So it wasn't that I thought I was the world's best and that I was on some kind of ego trip. It was just kind of noticing a problem to be solved and leaning into that. And the sort of document automation was really one tool, but an important tool in that leaning into it process.
Yes. And I think that when we kind of had our first conversation around this, I think we both kind of had this idea about the business model and how it fits into this harmonized business plan that you have at LCN Legal, and your kind of broader vision for what that looks like. So let's dig a little bit deeper into sort of how you first got started in document automation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so my first exposure to it was probably about 12 years ago. That's when I was still working in one of the large global firms. And so I was using document automation, but kind of at one step removed. So there was a team which was really good within that firm, which was able to use these tools, and I was providing legal input into that. And I found it really interesting. I could see the power of it, but it didn't have the immediacy of me being able to kind of do it myself and play about with it. And then in terms of my own firm, LCN Legal, it was something on my agenda for quite a while. And it was only back in 2019 that I said, well, I'm going to stop saying I'm going to do this and actually just try it out. And so it was literally, screw it, let's just get started with something. And so what I decided to get started with was, let's see if we can use a tool like this to create an automation sequence for the simplest type of intercompany agreement, which is a cost plus arrangement. And that's really how it all started. And when it got, the point that I got really, really excited about it was with that first tool and being able to share it with a community. So basically I invited about 25, 30 transfer pricing advisors literally across the world. So in Australia, Singapore, USA, UK, to try it out and give feedback on the results as well as on the questionnaire. And going through that process meant that over a period of just like 6 weeks, I could get feedback from those 20, 25 people and make incredible progress in a way that would be difficult elsewhere, or in taking a different route.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really good way of doing it too, and engaging other people in that process as well, especially early on. I remember when I first had our first phone call, it was about 10 minutes long, and I thought you were amazing. And I was so happy to get to network with you and chat with you. But I remember it was my first kind of experience being reintroduced into Document after 2 years of a bit of a break and doing other things. And and I remember you said, and I knew a little bit about you, about your expertise. And you said, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I was like, yeah, but you're kind of like really, really smart. So I don't think that's the best gauge. But could you go into a little bit about this sort of entry into, because you kind of talked about how you were not, not really thinking about this for a while, and then sort of, massaged your way into it and just kind of went out on a limb to try it. So regarding that sort of getting started in document automation and just sort of that first leap into it, for people who might feel like it seems like maybe a little bit complicated, I don't know if I can do it, only smart people work on that. And obviously we're all smart here, we're all lawyers, and we're all, people who are doing a lot of things. But can you give me a little bit of advice on, for people who are kind of just coming in and feeling a little bit nervous about maybe the complexity and the ease of use of Documate to kind of new entrants?
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, I would say, I'm an incredibly late starter in this area in terms of my career. I had no background in programming, and it is literally it's 100 times easier than you might think if you hadn't tried it. And because I wanted to do this as a side project, I was still involved in running the law firm, as I still am, still doing client chargeable work, still running articles and trying to provide thought leadership as well. So I had a limited time budget for trying this out as a side project. And so it had to be something that I could fail at. In other words, it had to be an investment which was proportionate. And so when I was choosing the system, obviously there are a number of different platforms, but I chose one. Documate appeared to be something that I could use without having to go through 2 weeks training courses beforehand. And I found that actually you can just log right in and you can create a basic questionnaire, online questionnaire, and you can link it with the Word template. And that's, you start to create something. So I'd definitely say, just try it out.
Mhm.
I would say, see it as a kind of incremental step. It's one step up from creating a template. So you can just
Right.
create a Word template of a document. That's already one step up, especially if you've got an organization around you. Just that
Mhm.
act of saying, we're going to have a template that we as a firm are going to use. And then you only have to automate one or two variables within that template to start to get a benefit, and then you can build on that. So that's the advice that I would give.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that point about it's kind of about front loading your work, right? And like you said, setting up that initial template, you do that with contracts or other agreements anyway. So this is just kind of front loading that work in a different way by maybe spending that little bit of time to learn the platform, which, like you said, is fairly easy to pick up from an operational standpoint. Maybe the logic can be more complex, and maybe the way that interacts with other integrations can be complex, but the actual platform and getting into and getting started in document automation from the get-go isn't as hard as you might think. So with that being said, what kinds of tools have you created using document automation?
Yeah, so basically it's four types of tools that we use or we've created at the moment. So one is just a tool to draft a single agreement. So in our case, it's generally but not exclusively intercompany agreements. For example, an agreement for provision of services which are charged on a cost plus basis. That was our first one. So we got a series of tools which are like that. The next step up, and by the way, these are primarily for internal use by our lawyers. The step up from that is tools also for internal use, but create a suite of documents with interconnected data. So an example of that would be, we do group reorganization projects. So we've created tools that prepare board minutes, which link in with a deed of assignment, which link in with shareholder resolutions and documents lists and so on. In other words, it produces 6 or 7 documents which are all related to that core data. The next type of tool is just internal documents, so things like proposal documents, engagement letters, that kind of basic internal tool, and I think that's really helpful just for internal consistency. And then the last type of tool that we use is ones that we make available for use generally by the world at large. So the latest one is a health check tool. So basically it's designed to guide advisors and lawyers within corporates through a process so that they can check an existing intercompany agreement against the transfer pricing policies in a logical and consistent and systematic way, even without much prior knowledge of that. So that kind of tool we generally make available for free, because it's a way of giving the most value to the marketplace, to the community out of that, and also it serves a marketing benefit for us. It's the gift that keeps on giving, and again, we benefit from feedback from users as to features or ideas or concepts that we can build in. So that's the final tool that we tend to use.
I appreciate that. And I feel like you kind of mentioned that this is kind of something that there's a lot of different ways that you're using it, and also a lot of different team members. It's not that you are the only person building this on your team. From the marketplace, it looks like we have a couple of other people at the law firm who are also engaging in this kind of app building process. And so what is your approach, maybe either individually and or as a team, to creating new document automation tools, or these types of sort of both internally and externally facing tools? And how can that process and your approach make it to where you can have those tangible results in a short period of time?
Yes, so I have to say we don't have a particularly structured approach in terms of how we create tools. It's definitely demand-led and value-led as opposed to volumes. So we don't care that much about how often these tools are going to be used, although hopefully it's going to be more than once. It's about how much value are we creating here, either because it's consistency, like engagement letters, that kind of internal process, or value because we're creating something that is inherently high value in the marketplace, or high value as regards what we do. For example, another key transaction type from an internal perspective or a transfer pricing perspective would be cash pooling agreements. They are inherently complex, they're inherently somewhat high risk for the corporates, and therefore the benefit of encapsulating our know-how in something that actually produces a tangible result is really up there. So we tend to be led by that. And then in terms of how we engage the whole team, it's really that the team is involved in testing. So they're in effect that they are the guinea pigs, they are the users, they're the customers, they're the people who basically I need to please in terms of creating these workflows. And I guess from a conceptual perspective, it's always helpful to link it back to what is our mission. What are we trying to achieve here? In our case, our mission is to bridge those worlds of tax and legal in transfer pricing, in being the best on the planet, the best firm on the planet, best team on the planet in terms of solving this. And so one helpful question is to say, well, if we were the best, if we are the best, what else should we be thinking about? What would the leading team be expected to produce for the benefit of the community as well as just for its own benefit? So that's a helpful steer for us.
Yeah, I do appreciate that, because like you said, when you are striving to be a certain thing in the market, when you're striving to be the best and the leader, you do have to consider a proactive approach to change and having to be the ones who are willing to adapt and iterate as much as possible. So in the last 4 minutes or so that we have together, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get started or who wants to give more value in this area? And can you also touch a little bit on that sort of iterative approach that you use?
Yes. So for me, I mean, it's absolutely aligned with your last speaker on Lightning Talks, which is taking an iterative, agile approach. So my philosophy is absolutely get started as quickly as possible, get something out there which can be used by somebody. It's either your internal customers or external customers or users. Get that feedback and iterate from it. And I think in the headline for this talk, it was about getting results within 14 days. Actually, you can get it in a couple of days, even if you don't want to do the coding yourself for whatever reason. There are plenty of people that you can hook up with, whether it's you, Brittany, or other people who can provide that kind of support. And the important thing is just to make that choice what's the first document that you're going to use, or what's the first workflow that you're going to focus on, and thinking, how can I create the absolutely minimum viable product which will make a contribution? It doesn't matter how big that contribution is, just a measurable contribution, and let's create something and get everyone to use it internally, and then iterate from there. And that's how you get those incremental gains over a period of 1, 2, 3, 5 years, so that you end up in a position that you would never have imagined that you'd be in.
Absolutely. And just a kind of a follow-up on that a little bit is around this idea of the minimum viable product, which a lot of different startups will hear about as they're pitching to investors and everything. So when it comes to building a minimum viable product and really stripping it down to because a lot of these builds can be more complex, especially in a complex area such as transfer pricing and intercompany agreements. So when you're trying to take this huge idea and this huge concept and strip it down to that MVP, what do you look at in terms of and just a quick summary in about 2 minutes or so, how to kind of go about not trying to overcomplicate something and stripping it down to its essential bit?
Yes, so one way of looking at it, and if I take the example of the cost plus services agreement, so sometimes you have a bilateral agreement, so a single service provider with a single service recipient. Sometimes it's a single service provider, but providing the same service to multiple companies in the group. And when you think about the kind of manual drafting changes that you have to make to that kind of document, as to whether it's a single service recipient or multiple service recipient, that change will probably be reflected in maybe 50 different clauses of the agreement, or 20 or something like that. So just capturing that one variable and implementing that's already a massive time saver. So you probably cut out 30 minutes per document of really routine, low value grunt work. And so you've already got something which is ticking the box on value. And then you can go and think about what's the next variable that has a major input or impact on the architecture of the document, if you like, and say, well, okay, let's capture that variable and build that into the output. And it's really taking it step by step in that approach, so that you're aiming to get the most value from each individual increment that you introduce, as well as choosing the transaction type that gives you the biggest impact.
I think that's a great point as far as an individual build. And I would just add, right before we go into questions for 5 minutes, that from an overall strategic approach, and especially for people who are new to document automation, one thing that I would also add and suggest is considering your morale and your this idea of you're going in and you're going to start to try to create something for the first time. Choose something that you can turn around within those 14 days, or something that you can turn around quickly within a day or 2 days, because it's kind of that morale boost and that kind of confidence boost, so that you don't lose this desire that you have because it feels hard when you just start. So I just wanted to say thank you for sharing all of these different insights. And I know this time goes by so quick, but I think that you've packed in so much great advice. And I think right now we'll just pause and see if anyone has any questions, and if not, I'll move on to wrap-ups and announcements. But if let's just pause here and take a moment to see if anyone has any questions. We have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions.
I have a question for Paul, if no one else is going to jump in. Paul, that was super incredibly helpful. I feel like every time I listen to you talk about what you're working on, I learn something new about the process and the output. I'm curious if what's next for you guys? What's next on the roadmap, and how do you plan on kind of expanding the things that you've built so far?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. I think it's a combination of things. One is just building on the excuse me, incremental improvements to the tools that we've already got. For example, adding in different transaction types to the ones that we already automate in terms of our client service delivery. Definitely one thing that we want to do a lot more of is those kind of public access tools, because I really believe that it's a way to share know-how and really contribute to the community. And it's actually a lot more effective, I think, than writing articles, because when you write an article, someone might think, oh, that was useful, hopefully, and yes, I can use it. But if you create something that people can come to regularly and will actually help them to create something useful, whether it's a checklist, or we have a scoping tool, for example, that helps people work out what agreement types they might need for any given group. So we want to do more of that, which I think is, you could describe as kind of scoping tools or diagnostic tools using the Documate framework. So that's the way that we're moving. And then further in the future, it's really integrating that into more holistic document management for our clients, because really we see ourselves as the custodian, the guardian of the portfolio of intercompany agreements for each corporate. We already do that, but it's a somewhat manual process, putting signed copies in SharePoint and so on. So we need, and there's this huge opportunity, a really exciting opportunity to introduce more technology into that process so that we can reduce cost, improve quality, improve client experience.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. Dorna, you're on mute if you wanted to add.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, thank you for that. I was just going to say that we also have an API where you can push documents over to SharePoint now. So for anyone who's not using that already, that may be very useful for really automating your full process. But thank you, Paul.
If there's enough time, if I can pose a question to Paul.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Paul, I've been hearing this iterations. I can't argue with that. But when you're first trying to get out, there's, whether it be 2 or 14 days, the concern would be if you put a product out that's just hideous, right? And somebody goes and looks at it and says, oh, this is terrible. You've really kind of spoiled the opportunity for that person to come back. And so obviously you don't want to put out something that's hideous. How do you know when this is, you mentioned a minimum viable product. How do you know when you've reached that point? And even if something is viable, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be attractive to somebody, especially if it's, if you're trying to, make money off the product, monetize it.
Yeah, no, really good question. And I'm really, really sensitive to the hideous product risk. I guess, but for us, when I say sort of create something and get it out, I really mean within the internal team. So absolutely, I wouldn't want to put something out to members of the public if it wasn't pretty smooth and polished already. But obviously with our internal team, because whatever we do or whatever tool we create will be hopefully a clear step up from just having a template, then it's a safe environment. And even if it is hideous, people can tell me that it is hideous and I can fix it. So I would say internally, embrace the hideousness. Externally, yes, absolutely. You need to do a certain amount of testing, but I also believe in the power of using your warm relationships. And it's a statement of trust. People like to contribute, so you can actually get that feedback in a safe environment just by sharing it with 5 or 10 people who already know that you're not, you produce high quality work, and you can get some early feedback, which can take you masses forward, huge leaps forward in terms of avoiding the later hideousness.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think that's a fabulous answer and a great question, Michael. And also, I would just also say we have such a fabulous Slack community where people can post what they're working on in show and tell or in the general chat. You can always reach out to me or Molly or Dorna or Paul or anyone in that community, and everyone's very, very supportive. So if you have something that you're kind of trying to figure out, see if you want to work on it, then please do feel free to post it there. So we are going to move on in a little bit. We have a couple of announcements. If you need to go, that's completely fine. But if you want to stay on for announcements and networking, please do. I'm just going to share my screen quickly and go over a couple of quick announcements. So the free health check tool that Paul was talking about that his team is working on is coming soon to the Documate marketplace. If you're not familiar with the marketplace, please go ahead and check it out. It's amazing, and you can also put your own tools on there as well. From my side, I have a Documator certification course, and even though it is easy to kind of get started with Documate, if you want to learn sort of the ins and outs of it in an organized fashion from start to finish and also get certified, then you can let me know that if you want to join the waitlist for the pre-sale launch on November 30th. I'm also the global ambassador to law school, so if you or anyone you know is works for a law school and you want me to come and do a workshop on how to build with Documate to the students, let me know. I'm also dropping a new course today on how to build a website using software and Airtable. So I will drop that on LinkedIn very soon. And then from the Documate side, there's a lot of new things going on. So there's some new features that just dropped. There's a beta feature. So that kind of goes to Michael's question around like a beta cohort or early users. So this is a good example of that. If you want to test out the data manager for the end users, you can just email Documate at help@documate.org. Also, from the Documate side, there's a lot of announcements that were also put out in the newsletter, so I won't spend too much time here, but they include things like document storage, increased customization, end user dashboards, and a news app to create and populate a new session. Our next speaker will be Molly Anderson, who is here, our very own, and we're going to move it up a tiny bit for the 15th of December rather than the last Thursday, just because of holidays. So her topic will be TikTok and access to justice, which will be amazing. She's the director of content strategy for Documate. So thank you all for your time. If you want to stay on for 5 minutes of speed networking, please do stay on. If you'd like to get in touch with Paul, you can do so here. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can do so here. We're going to stop the recording at this juncture, and then we're going to move on to speed networking. Thank you for those.